and the honor to introduce Dr. Harry J. Aponte. I first saw Dr. Aponte when I was a doctorate student in attendance at a National Family Therapy Conference. Dr. Aponte was a consultant in a live family therapy case. I was in total awe at his presence and moved by how connected and aware of self he was. In real time, I witnessed how he created a therapeutic experience for every member of that family. I really saw the person of the therapist as the instrument through which everything flowed, and my own soul was touched. I wanted to be that kind of therapist. Little did I know that I would get to work with Dr. Aponte and receive mentorship. Today, I am truly blessed to call him a teacher, mentor, and friend. Dr. Aponte has many scholarly accomplishments that you can all Google. That's not what I'm here to tell you about tonight. What I want you to know is that he is a man of substance and commitment to the work of family therapy. Dr. Aponte operates from the soul. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. Harry J. Aponte.
Hi, can everybody see me and hear me now? Are we on?
I think we're good.
Okay. I've been wrestling with this computer all day long today, so I'm just glad that we finally made it. So you're out there. I wish I could see you so that I could relate to you in a more personal sort of way. I'm sort of having to imagine who you are, you know. Anyway, I'm from New York. I was born and raised in, well, first of all, I was born in Spanish Harlem, raised the early part of my life in Black Harlem. That was 104 124th Street. That was 124th and Lenox Avenue. And in, I think it was 1943, during the race riots at that time. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. But all of the white stores were destroyed, and we were up all night, and cops were around on horseback trying to minimize human damage, but not property damage. I learned sometime later that our former Secretary of State and head of the military had moved to the same place in Cully Street in the South Bronx as I did. And so I just feel a real connection with New York. My heart is still there. And I've since then moved. I'm in Philadelphia now, but that was via Topeka, Kansas. I got my master's at Fordham. That was back in 1959. And I went there for an extra year of training and ended up staying there for about 8 years. And I'm giving you all of this because it has a lot to do with what the person of the therapist is about. Because I had been working for Catholic Charities on I think it was Lexington Avenue, somewhere like that. And I wanted to get a little more training, and so I took a course on psychopathology, and in the lobby of the school that I was in, they had an advertisement there for a year of postgraduate training for social workers at their clinic. Well, just to show you the limitations of somebody who's grown up in the neighborhood that I grew up, it was the advertisement was from the Menninger Clinic. I had no idea what the Menninger Clinic was, and it was located in Topeka, Kansas, and I had no idea where Kansas was, much less where Topeka was. But the advertising sounded very important. So I applied for it, not knowing what I was going to get into. And I ended up in Topeka, Kansas for that extra year of training. And I ended up staying there for 8 years and working with the clientele that they had at Menninger's. Well, at that time, I don't think they had insurance the way they do now, because the clientele were all very wealthy people, people from corporations, people from rich families, people from the movie industry. I remember seeing some very well-known actors there, and Nobel Prize winners. I ended up working with one of them, with one of his family. He wasn't the patient, and a lot of people of considerable stature in that society. And the problem I had is that and this is true, I had never spoken to a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in my life. You know, I spoke with Jews, I spoke with the Irish, I spoke with the Italians, and I grew up basically in a Black neighborhood where I was the only Hispanic in that neighborhood on 124th Street. So those were my friends, and those are the people that I was socialized by. So there we go, you know. So I end up going to Topeka to get the training, and I found I did not understand these people. No exaggeration, and I don't think they understood me either very well. And so it was a real struggle just to try to make some kind of connection, and I felt really quite inadequate. They spoke English a whole lot better than I did. My language at home was Spanish. I'm Puerto Rican, and I never spoke English at home. So trying to really communicate with these people was quite an ordeal, and I didn't understand their lifestyle. I didn't understand how they related to one another. They just seemed kind of cold and kind of distant to me. And I had a tough time just trying to get into what they were dealing with in life. I saw that they were suffering. I could see that they were hurt. I wasn't insensitive to that, but I was having some trouble sometimes really understanding why they were hurt, considering all the comforts of life that they seem to be accustomed to. Okay. What I do remember in particular, and I just want to tell this little anecdote, was that there was a man whose wife was hospitalized there. I still remember his name. And he was a rancher. When you say he was a rancher, to me in those days, I could only think of Gary Cooper and John Wayne, and people like that. I had never met a rancher in my life. and I'm sure this guy never met a guy from the ghetto in his life, and he seemed very old to me. He was obviously younger than I am now, but at that time I was in my early 20s, and this guy seemed like, you know, somebody from another planet to me. Anyway, to make a long story short, I worked very hard to try to understand this guy. I worked very hard to try to get a feeling for what he was going through with his wife, you know, being in the hospital and being, you know, seriously ill. And I was supposed to be a source of support for him and of real help. I have no recollection of what we were dealing with. What I do remember is that the last time that we met, he gave me a present. He gave me a handcrafted leather wallet. I don't know where it is. Some point in my life, I lost it. But it was a gorgeous thing, a beautiful thing. And he gave it to me with real heart. You know, this guy cared about me. And the reality was that I cared about him. I had learned to really get a sense of who he was, a sense of what he was going through. And I really put my heart and soul into trying to be of help to him. And, you know, obviously he felt that I did something for him or he wouldn't have given me the present that he gave me. But my point here being is that there I was, a professional, trying to understand what this client of mine was going through. But the client of mine was somebody who came from another world, from another culture, from another life experience, and I was the same to him. And I had to really stretch myself to really get a feel, some sense of this man's soul. And we did make that connection. Those 8 years in Kansas were really a very big challenge for me altogether, because of the being in the clinic there at Menninger's and trying to get adjusted to the environment of being in Kansas. But let me tell you another anecdote. This is all this is all relevant, by the way. The anecdote is this one. There were a number of students from other countries there, and some of them were from Latin America. And they had come up with a bit of a kind of experiment. And I don't know exactly what they were looking for. I never got the results of it, but I'll tell you what my experience was. What they did was they had a list of questions about our personal lives. And they said, we're going to record this. Now, we're going to ask you these questions in English, and you answer them in English. And then we're going to ask you the very same questions in Spanish, and you'll answer in Spanish. I said, okay, that didn't seem to be too challenging a venture. So they went through the questions in English. I answered them all very quickly, easily, no problem. And then they asked me the same questions in Spanish. And it wasn't long before I was crying. I mean, actually crying. I was so emotionally moved, telling my life experience in my native tongue. And it was only then that I realized that in order to make an adjustment to live and work with and relate to English-speaking people, that there was a part of me that I was hiding from myself. And it was so strange for me to realize that there was this part of me that I grew up with, because even at that time, my parents were alive and they were still speaking Spanish only, and that there was a part of my heart that was there in the language, and that I had to make a real leap, a bigger leap than I ever realized, in order to be able to relate to English-speaking people, you know. And again, this eventually fed into my awareness of what it takes to make a connection with people at a level of heart where you really understand what they're experiencing, what they're really suffering, what they're really struggling with, to walk in somebody else's moccasins, as the old saying goes. It stayed with me. Then beyond that, I also went into psychoanalysis at the Menninger Clinic, and there they encourage you to do that, and they charge us very little money to see the analyst, 5 times a week for 50 minutes each time for over 4 years. And that's what I was involved in. So I was talking about my own life experience with the analysts and my struggles and my hangups. And I was pretty aware of my hangups, but my fantasy was that I'm going to go through psychoanalysis and I'm going to become healed. I'm going to work out all these issues that I have. Okay, so I had very high hopes for psychoanalysis. Yeah, in the meantime, I get a letter from Salvador Minuchin, who had spoken to Braulio Montalvo, Puerto Rican, who worked with him in Philadelphia. And Sal was inviting me to come work with him at the Child Guidance Clinic at 17th and Bainbridge in Philadelphia. My real response at that time, I said to him, I'm not quite finished with the analysis. I think if I sat down with a little old lady who looked like my mother, that I would be quite useless in terms of what I could do for her. Because I don't know how much control I would have over my emotions in dealing with her. Well, okay, he accepted that. A year later, he wrote me another letter, said, well, you're done. And I was, okay? So I went to Philadelphia, interviewed for the clinic, accepted a job. And I was there for the next 11 years at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. But the thing about going to Philadelphia and to 17th and Bainbridge was that it was a Black neighborhood, and I felt at home. This is the environment that I grew up in, and I was completely comfortable there. And the clinic was having trouble with the community. Windows were being broken by some members of the community, but this was an organized thing. This was 1968 now when I got to Philadelphia, and Sal came to me, and I'm quoting him now. He says, "Look, you're the blackest one in our clinic, so you deal with them, because the person we're having doing that is not succeeding whatsoever. So I said, well, okay, I don't, it's kind of weird the way you're asking me, but all right, I'll sit down at the next meeting you're going to have. It was a group of about 20 people from the community, and they were sitting there with to meet with Sal and a couple of the other administrators there, and I was there for the first time. And they talked and talked and talked, and finally, the head of that committee, whose name I remember is George Peoples, he said, "Well, we're gonna talk now, and we'd like you white people to leave so that we can have our own little conference here." And I thought for a moment, I don't think this guy knows what he just said. I don't think he realizes what he just said. Well, Sal got up with his age, and he looks at me, and I'm still sitting there. So I'm thinking, the hell, I'm not going to get up, because this is absurd for me to be getting up. And I think this is going to hurt his feelings, and I think it did. He wasn't too pleased about it, but he walked out, and I was there with the group from the community, they're all Black, and they acted like I wasn't there, though they continued, they started to meet. And then finally, one of them said, I can't take this anymore. He said, why are you sitting here? We don't want to insult you, but, we did ask these people to leave. I said, yeah, you asked the white people to leave, and you didn't pay attention to who I was. And I'm from, my family's from Puerto Rico, and I grew up in Harlem. And so I wasn't about to get up and leave with them. So then they said, oh, all right. They were still uncomfortable with me because I really didn't belong to that community. We had a few meetings, and what they basically wanted was they wanted to be able to direct the clinic to be like an advisory board, but that would tell the clinic how to conduct its business. I said, well, I don't think you can do that, because I don't think you know the work that we do. We really have to be trained for it. But I understand what you're looking for, and we can aim to reach those goals. But run the clinic and direct it, I don't think it's possible. So they insisted, and I said, well, then we're not going to be able to meet anymore. So that ended the meetings. And then I went out into the community, and I went to the stores, and I went to talk to the people in the street, and I wanted to get to know who they were. I wanted to get to know really who had power in that community, who had influence. And I ran into a guy named Jim Lester, who at that time was called a militant. And he was a pretty scary guy. And didn't want to meet me at first, but I said, well, I want to meet you because I think we have similar interests. He had a lot of control over the gangs that were there, and knew what was going on in the community, and had a lot of control over what happened in that community. So there were very few gang wars and stuff like that going on under his direction. Long story short, and eventually we he got some money by doing a telethon. He got one of the stations, TV stations, to give him some time for that. He had a little bit of pull in the community, raised money, bought a building, went to University of Penn, got in touch with the Department of Education there, got some of the Black students who were in the Department of Education to come to volunteer as a practicum for their training. And we had a school. And but then we needed kids. And he said, well, how do we find out who these kids are that should come to this thing? And I said, well, we just go to the superintendent of schools. He said, well, I have never done that before. I said, well, that's the advantage. I represent this clinic and I think I can get to the superintendent and I want you to come with me. So we went to talk to the superintendent. We told him our story, what we did. And he said, fine, but you have to see these kids after school. You can't, even though these kids are all truants, the ones, he gave us the names of the truants, the chronic truants. So I said, all right, we'll deal with those kids and we'll see them, starting at 3:30 after school, and we'll have these teachers that are volunteered, and we already have a building and it's already been renovated and we're ready to go. And I had told Jim that the people from the clinic would end up seeing the families and would also do testing with these kids, and we would do a little research about it. And we did, well, just a little anecdote about that. These are all kids who were chronic truants. I don't remember how many there were, but there were several classrooms, and they were filled with these kids, because we went to the houses of every family, talked to the families, and convinced the families to send their kids there, and they were all going. Well, one day I decided I want to see what happens with these kids, because he said to them, I close the doors at 3:30, and if you come after 3:30, you can't come in. So he's telling the kids who've been chronic truants that if they don't make it on time, they can't go to school, right? Okay. Well, at like 3:28, I'm seeing these kids racing to try to get into that building before 3:30, because when Jim said, I'm going to lock the door, he meant he's going to lock the doors. And the kids came regularly. We tested them. After a few months, these kids jumped 2 and 3 grades in terms of their performance, because we tested them. It was a very successful experiment that we did, and eventually I got Jim and the school into the child guidance clinic itself to make it part of the environment for these kids. And they loved it, and the parents loved it. I can give you many more stories about what it was like for them, but it made all the difference in the world. And we had people who were very open to talking with us, for us to work with them. And I made a real bridge with the community. Okay, so what I'm telling you all of this because I'm telling you of my struggle is trying to make a connection with the people in Topeka at the Menninger Clinic. And I'm telling you about the community in South Philadelphia, their struggle to try to relate to the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. Most of the staff was white. Eventually, what Sal did, really to his credit, he recruited a number of people from the community, even who didn't have even college degrees, and he trained them to be therapists. And a number of them turned out to be excellent therapists, first-rate therapists. And he let me run the clinic while he concentrated on training these people to be therapists. So I became very conscious through all of these stories that I'm telling you, that trying to relate to people wasn't just about hearing their stories and trying to come up with a diagnosis. It really meant trying to relate to them at a level of heart where one could really feel what people were experiencing and what life was like for them. Okay. And this was part of what got into my head, and we were doing home visits at that time, which was a relatively new thing to be done. So we got to know the neighborhoods, we got to know their homes. And there were a number of things that I was doing to bridge the gap, between the environment, the white environment, and the people from this very particular neighborhood. I could go on with many more stories about some of the experiments that we tried that were very successful. And I was at home and I was happy and I loved the work that I was doing in that environment. So without realizing it, when I would work with my clients who came from that neighborhood, I could relate to them. And if they didn't realize where I came from, I let them know where I came from. But I was able to relate to their life experience because that was my life experience. It wasn't any different from what they were experiencing. Okay, so over time, I thought, I need to do something about training the staff that we have so that they could relate to the people from that particular environment, and because I still remember when Jim Lester set up the school in our clinic, which ended up, we moved on to the University of Penn campus, so a much bigger, fancier building. They were saying to me, that guy's a Hitler, he's just demanding, he's very strict with these kids. And I said, you don't understand. These kids look up to this guy. They really respect him. And if they came into the school not combing their hair and not being dressed properly for school, he'd send them home and tell them not to come back. And they'd be coming back with their mothers crying, wanting to get back into the school. Okay, it really meant something to them because they found somebody who could relate to them. Okay, and the school was very successful. Okay, it really worked for them, and all of this, it just came to me, and it just, I got out of the idea that what you have to do if you want to be a therapist is you have to go into your own therapy of one kind or another. Well, let's go back a bit. From the beginning of talking therapy, there was an awareness that who the therapist was and what was going on internally in that person, that has something to do with the work that people were doing. It has something to do with their ability to be successful. Sigmund Freud wrote an article, and in which he spoke about training and how it was necessary that somebody who wanted to be a psychoanalyst had to undergo a psychoanalysis of himself or herself. But it didn't stop there, and this is key, because what he said in it was, was that your own analysis is interminable, that every few years you should go again into analysis and then go again into analysis for the rest of your career. And what did that say to me? What that said to me is, even though he's sending these trainees, these students who want to be analysts to undergo an analysis so they could do this work, he does not believe this analysis really gets at the root of all their issues, and that they're going to be dealing with that for the rest of their lives. Okay. But people didn't relate to that. People thought, well, you're going to analysis, you get yourself together, and suddenly you have it all together. Well, you don't have it all together. And Freud didn't have it all together. And he said he obviously did not undergo any kind of analysis himself with anybody. Okay. But from the very beginning of talking therapy, there was an awareness of we, the therapists, have issues of our own. And these issues of our own affect the way we do our work, the way we see our clients, the way we judge their particular issues, the way we think of trying to help them to solve their issues. Okay, so that then became a given for the training of analysts, and over time, it evolved. So you got Carl Jung. He had his own way of dealing with this thing, and then sometime in the 40s, there was another analyst, who Theodore Reich, and what he said, he was the one who came up with the phrase "listening with the third ear." Okay, and what essentially that meant was, you don't listen with just your ears, but you also listen with your emotional reactions to what people are saying and to how they're presenting themselves. So that is also data, that's also information. So yes, you listen, you look at them, okay, but you also have to open yourself and be receptive to being allowing yourself, okay, to feel the impact of what they're saying and what they're trying to communicate, okay, which is still different from Freud, because Freud, even though he talked about undergoing analysis, he said, if you're going to be a psychoanalyst, you need to be like a surgeon, okay? You need to be able to just hold yourself, really as an anonymous person, and your feelings have nothing to do with this thing, except you have to try to get yourself together, okay? But Theodore Reich was saying, if you're going to relate to these people, you're going to have to, open yourself up in some way, be vulnerable, humanly vulnerable, so that you feel the impact of what people are suffering and what they're struggling with when they're talking. So we don't, as therapists, we don't have MRIs and we don't have X-rays and so on and so on. But we have ourselves, and that self, in order to be able to relate to what another person is experiencing, really has to get into their shoes. It really, in some way, has to get a feeling of, what their human experience is. So that was already opening my mind up to, I was thinking about what I had gone through, and I was thinking about what these guys were writing about. But in particular, also, I was very conscious of, it's not just what happens to you internally, emotionally, that affects the way you do your therapy. In fact, I forgot one little thing. I still remember one of the psychiatrists in Topeka, Kansas, who mentioned the community that people come from, the socioeconomic environment, whatever it was. And he says, that's a given. We don't have to pay attention to that. All you have to pay attention to is what's going on internally in them. Well, that was not my experience, obviously. Okay, my experience was that what I grew up in and the experiences that I had in my own personal life, that these things affected me, and they affected me profoundly. Okay, and they never left me, and they still haven't left me. Okay, I am what I came from. Yes, I've added other layers to that, but it's an awareness that says I need to be aware of not only what I'm experiencing internally, emotionally, but I also have to be aware of the environment that I've come from and how that has affected me, how that it's, my insecurities. Okay, I have a certain real shyness about being involved with people who are come from money, come come from success and so on. And I'm part of the, my wife talked me into joining the Union League in Philadelphia. And they accepted me. Well, there was one black guy on the committee that did the accepting, and I could see his responsiveness to me. And I was sure once I saw him, I said, he's going to let me in. So they accepted me. So I was part of that, but I'm not comfortable there. I still go there, but I still feel like a foreigner because I'm more what I was inside than what I appear to be on the outside. Okay. And so I started to put together what I had learned from psychoanalysis in terms of your inner self and what that's like, and how that affects your perception, how you interpret life, how you interpret people's problems, and you interpret their struggles. But I also then had to have a vision that included not only the person, but the person's family and the environment, the social environment that they grew up in. Okay, what was that like? Okay, I can give you examples about that, and I'm going to I'll bore you with it, but I will eventually. I have to tell you about that because that's the only way that I can really communicate what I'm trying to sell, which is this person of the therapist way of approaching who the person is that's doing the therapy. Well, you know, Freud's idea of prescribing psychoanalysis for people who are students was carried on by the psychoanalytic world. But when family therapy came into play with Virginia Satir, for example, and Murray Bowen, by the way, had trained at Menninger's. Virginia didn't, but he had. They also required a certain work on yourself in order to prepare you to become a therapist. Virginia used to have her month-longs, you know, in the Midwest, and she would have people role play the family of the therapists who came to the conference, and they would deal with their issues there, and she would work with them to make them aware of their issues, to make them aware of how they were contributing to their own problems and how that was connected with their families. And she was trying to help people to resolve that, okay, so that then they would be freer to not impose upon their clients their own problems. Murray Bowen did something similar by saying to people, you know, you really have to differentiate yourself from your family. So then he coached people who were trying to be therapists to go to their families and to open up the secrets that were in the family and to free themselves from these traditions from the families, from the secrets that the families had that tied people to certain ways of looking at life, looking at themselves, relating to other people. Okay, and that's been the tradition in the field of therapy. I could go into more detail about it, but we don't have time to do that right now. But Virginia would talk about she wanted to be not only self-aware, but to be fully present. And she talked about being fully more an integrated person who could be fully present and engaged with clients. And she did that expertly. I've worked with a lot of different therapists over the years, and to me, Virginia was probably the most gifted of them all, the most instinctive in terms of understanding and relating to people. But she premised that you needed to work out a lot of your issues with yourself and to become a more whole person, as she would put it, okay, so that then you could really more intimately connect with people and feel their presence and feel their something of their experience. Okay, so that's been the tradition, which is in effect, saying that if you want to be an effective therapist, that you really need to do something to heal yourself, so that your own issues would not get in the way, blind you, or distort your perspective, and you would also be freer to use yourself in working with people and connecting with them. All of that sounded right, and I ascribe to it all. I think all of that is useful, helpful, and important. However, I didn't think it was enough, because I was too aware of the culture and the values and the life experience that we have, where not only with our families, but in the communities that we grow up in, and that all of that is there with us, sometimes, as it had been with me, locked in there, but it was still influencing me. And so I thought, well, we have to expand our perspective and not just relate to a person's inner psyche, that we have to relate to the inner psyche, yes, but we also have to relate to what's the dynamics of the family, and we have to relate to the dynamics of the social environment and economic environment in which they grow up. Okay, my parents remained in the Bronx after my wife and I, got married in Philadelphia, and I've been in Philly ever since 1968. Okay, but I remember going to New York and the trouble that I had finding good medical care for my parents, and I realized that all these agencies that they had and all these resources that they had, they were readily available to people, but you really had to know how to walk the maze and overcome the obstacles in order to get the right kind of treatment. I'll give you one other short anecdote. My wife and I would drive occasionally, at least once a month, to New York to see my parents. I'm an only child, and they were still living in the South Bronx. And she started to tell me at one point, one of these days, it's going to be the last time you're going to see your parents alive. They're not going to live forever. I hadn't, I knew that intellectually, but I hadn't really felt it. And then I remember the last time I saw my father. My mother was in the house looking out the window saying goodbye to us as we're going to the car, but my father came out, and my wife's words came to my mind, and I gave my father a hug, and he gave me a very strong hug. Well, later on that year, he said, I'm feeling sick. I think I have a cold, but I haven't been able to get rid of it. And I don't know what's wrong with me. And so I convinced him to go to the hospital. This was all by phone, because I never saw him face to face again. So he went with a friend of his. He went to the hospital. They saw him, but they wouldn't put him in the inpatient. They just saw him and said, there's nothing more we can do with you. And then they just sent him home. I was supposed to be going out to do a workshop in Ann Arbor. That one day when he called me back and said, hey, they wouldn't take me in, they wouldn't help me, and I feel like I'm going to die, and I said, I said, well, who did you talk to? I talked to the doctor, but he wouldn't listen to me. He said I was, that it wasn't that serious. So anyway, I did something that I wasn't accustomed to doing because of my background. And so I called Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx, and I said, I want to talk to the director of the hospital. Ta-da, you never get a hold of these people. Well, lo and behold, he got on the phone. And I told him what was going on. I said, listen, I got to go out of town. My father says he's going to die. Whoever saw him there said, it wasn't that serious, sent him home. And he's really telling me he's going to die. And I can't leave. And with this going on, the guy said, okay, don't worry. Tell your father to come back. We'll put him in and we'll observe him. I said, okay. He said, you can go ahead. I said, well, I'm not going to go ahead until you call me and you tell me that he's actually been admitted. I didn't trust the system. Okay. So that night I took a plane, got to Ann Arbor, went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I get a phone call from my wife. Your father died. Okay. Right now I'm just about ready to start crying, inside. But, I was struggling with the system, and then and this was all really confirmed for me when the friend of my father who took him there said to me, he said, let me tell you a story. When I went up to the house, he said, when I got to the house, your father was sitting next to the phone in the hallway. And I said, why are you sitting there? He says, I'm waiting for Harry to call. He's going to call the hospital. He says, well, you don't have to sit by the phone. He says, yeah, I want to sit by the phone because if he tells me he's going to call, he's going to make that phone call. I want to be sure I get the phone call. Well, he says he trusted me. Well, I made the phone call and got him into the hospital. And but what is said, I didn't have a great relationship with my father. I won't talk about what kind of a father he was, but he wasn't anybody who really spent much time with his son. But what really touched me was he trusted me, and it was my wife who gave me the cue to say, pay attention. You're not going to have him around forever. And I paid attention to what he was going through and what he was dealing with and how the community was dealing with him. So he could trust me. All right. Well, that just really, put the nail in the coffin in a sense. But what it just absolutely said to me is I must take into account, what we as therapists bring to the work that we do. That has to do not only with our inner psyche, but with our social environment. Okay. And that became part of what I then incorporated into, I've got to train people to be aware of this, to be aware of people's moral values, their cultural values, the experiences that they had with their family, the experiences that they had in the neighborhood, in the streets in the neighborhood, and so on. And it needed to be something more than just sort of fixing, the inner self, but, there was also another step that I took, and that was that I realized that to make a connection with another human being, I had to somehow feel their soul, what was where the pain was, what they were struggling with, how discouraged they were, okay, how anxious they were, how depressed they were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what came to me was that you know, when I'm dealing with people who came from my own environment, how easy it was for me to connect with them. I could feel their story, because what happens when they would start talking about what they were dealing with, I would start remembering what I dealt with growing up as a kid. You know, being told to go to the back door of a building because that was a fancy building on Park Avenue or something, that I went for some business as a youngster, as a young man. And when I was trying to run a day camp for kids, well, I wasn't allowed to go through the front door. I had to go through the back door, you know, and had other experiences like that. I could go down the list of those experiences, but I knew what that was like, you know, and you know, and that was with me, and it still is with me. And so I thought, you know, somehow or another, if I'm going to work with trainees, with people who want to be family, quote, family therapists, I need to get them to be aware not only of their own internal issues, but of also how their environment, the family environment and the social environment affected them, and what was inside of them, and what they were struggling with. And what I realized was, this is really important to me, it was that, you know, it was my own woundedness, my own failures, which I still live with and I still struggle with, that it was my being aware of them, my being aware of how hard it is for me to change, that allowed me to be more empathic to what my clients were struggling with, no matter whether they were white or they were any other color, okay, or culture, okay. We all have our experiences, we all have our pain, we all have our hurt. And what opened the door for me to what they were experiencing was by my actually going back into my memory, and not just up here, but here. And I could, and I would, if it didn't come spontaneously, I would look for something, try to remember something that would resonate with what they were trying to tell me. I wanted to be able to resonate with their experience, to feel their experience, okay? But I couldn't do that by being a surgeon. I had to do that by being a human being with them and allowing them to touch me, allowing them to make me want to cry for them, even if I didn't overtly cry for them, right? Okay, I wanted to feel them. I wanted to get a sense of them. And that helps me then to relate to them. That would help me to understand them. That would not only to understand them diagnostically, but also to understand what it would take in order to make some kind of change, and what kind of change I could expect from them, and not expect something that was unreachable. Okay, if Freud said you had to go through analysis over and over and over again, that meant they were dealing with some of these issues, they were going to deal with them for the rest of their lives, just like I am still dealing with a lot of these issues, you know, from my life. But being aware of it, okay, also then gave me more control over how I behaved. It gave me more awareness of how I was distorting things, how I was using my own experience to view them, and that was giving, that was, you know, skewing my perspective on their lives and their stories. And so being aware of that, I could then differentiate. I could say, all right, this is their experience, this is my experience. They're feeling this, I'm feeling that. But to go through that process, I really had to be really open and in a sense vulnerable, something that I wouldn't allow myself to be, because I had to be a tough guy. I had to be a guy who could handle whatever needed to be handled. And you don't go wallowing in, oh, this is a bad experience, that was a bad experience, this was a disappointment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I had to open myself back up to that part of my life experience. And that helped me really to then feel the person that was in front of me, no matter what the person's color was, no matter what their religion, no matter what their culture was. Okay, I would always be looking for, what do we have in common? What part of their struggle do I know? You know, I may not be behaving the way they're behaving or using it the way they're using it, but they're hurting in some place or another. I've got to use my own pain, my own experience. There must be something that I could find in common. And that would open me up to that person. And I could relate to that person really from inside of me. And I could see them, and I could see them in their environment. So I had more of a real sense of what they were dealing with. So that was my MRI, that was my X-ray. Okay, that was my CAT scan. Okay, and I learned to do that, and it really facilitated my relating to all kinds of people. And then I thought, you know, this is how I should be training the people who I'm trying to train into becoming, quote, family therapists, unquote. Okay, is that we really need to think systematically. Okay, and that the system, I'm a system, my family was a system, my neighborhood was a system, the society that I live in is a system, and all of these circles, they all related to one another, they all influence one another. Okay, and I had to have that available to me. Okay, so I'll tell you another anecdote. Hope you don't get tired of these stories, but this is my best way for me to illustrate what I'm saying. I was sitting down with a couple, white people, pretty well-to-do, influential people in the city of Philadelphia, and husband and wife, but they were not getting along. And I'm looking at them, and the wife is closed up. I mean, she's like this, you know. And I think, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm saying to myself, he doesn't realize how shut down she is to him, you know. And so I turn to her and I say, you're shut down from this guy. She said, yes, I'm afraid of him. Well, when she said, I'm afraid of him, the guy, who happened to have ADHD, by the way, and it wasn't very impulsive, he got up from his chair and he just leaned over her and started to yell at her. I mean, in a really threatening way. I thought, oh my God, he's going to hit this woman, you know. And, you know, right then and there, I went back to my old neighborhood, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to get in there and stop this guy no matter what. Guy was bigger than I am, stronger than I am, younger than I was at that time. And I thought he could knock the hell out of me, but he, you know, if he touches this woman, I'm going to have to get in there physically myself. But then I thought, wait a minute, this is not being a therapist, you know, this is being another hood, you know, from where I came from. And so I thought, how do I relate to this guy? I don't know what inspired me. Anyway, I allowed myself, without consciously planning it, to realize I was also afraid. Yeah, I would have gotten in there, but I was also afraid of my getting hurt. Okay, not only just destroying the therapy, but I'm gonna make a mess out of their therapy, and I may end up with a broken nose. So what did I do? I did something that was absolutely against every instinct I had from where I grew up. You know, when you're in the neighborhood there, you don't, when somebody threatens you physically, you don't show your fear, because if you show your fear, then you're really going to get your ass kicked in, all right? So you cover that up. In fact, you cover that up from yourself. And I thought, wait a minute, this guy has a relationship with me. I'm going to change the name, that his actual name, even the first name. So I said, Robert, well, that got his attention because we had a relationship. Robert, I'm afraid of you right now. I mean, I never thought I'd ever hear those words coming out of my mouth. And he was surprised, and he stopped suddenly, and he turned around and sat down and he said, "You're afraid of me, Harry?" I said, "Yes, I'm afraid of you, because I was afraid that you were gonna hit your wife there, and I was gonna have to try to stop you physically, you know, that this was gonna turn into something pretty nasty." The guy started to cry. I mean, cried. And he turned to his wife and said, "Was I threatening you in that way?" She said, "Yes, you were." Well, that changed the therapy. All right. That actually changed. I really got to the man's heart at that moment through an experience that I helped create. He created the emergency that we were dealing with, that we were about to have to contend with, but I created the experience in a way so that it got to what was soft in this guy and what was accessible in this guy. Well, that made a real impression on me. But I've got to add another bit of a story to this as to why this was so important to me. As I said to you, you know, I never had a great relationship with my father. But when we moved from Harlem to South Bronx, there was a bully there, a guy from Venezuela, a big white guy, and he was a bully, and he picked on me. And picked on me and picked on me. And then, make a long story short, one day in the playground, I said, "All right, Charlie, you know, we're going to have it out, you know." And I was going to get in there and get into a fight with this guy. And he probably would destroy me because he was so much bigger than I was, but he would really have to go out of his way because I was about to kill him if he let me kill him. Well, somehow he read that. And he said, no, never mind, forget it. You know, I won't bother you anymore. And that was the end. That was the end of of his bullying me. Well, that's not the whole story. When I walked out of the playground, my father had been watching from outside. And that was the one time in his life when I was a kid, he put his arm around me and how proud he was of me. Okay, it really meant something to him. Okay. As a by the way, years later, when I was in the School of Social Work and I was on a bus going to the clinic for my practicum, the traffic was awful, and a cop started to scream at the driver. I mean, really scream at him, and the driver, you know, obviously was stopped, and the guy was very threatening, and I looked, well, it was my friend Charlie had become a cop. Okay. So anyway, this was very meaningful to me to be able to be sitting down with somebody, with another man, and to say to that guy, "I'm afraid of you." And I meant it because it really was there. And because I meant it, it touched him. Okay. You know, everything that I'm saying here, what is it leading to? What's leading to is that what I'm saying is that these hangups that we have, this pain that we have, these failures that we have, these insecurities that we have, these addictions that we have, okay, you know, all of this, every bit of it can be used in the work that we do with our clients, because they come to us with all sorts of pain, all sorts of hurt, all sorts of insecurities, all sorts of intimidations that they hide, okay? And if we can open ourselves to them, you know, and experience them, not just listen to their words, not just be like a doctor who asks questions of a patient, but be like a doctor who says you need to go to an MRI, you need to get your X-ray or CAT scan or whatever. Okay, if we can allow ourselves to experience this person, so that what I do, and I do this automatically, I don't even have to think about it any longer, is that as I'm listening to their story, I'm going back in my memory. I'm going back into my past. I'm going back into even today, issues that I have today. And I'm getting myself in touch with something as close as it can be to what this person has experienced in their life. It may have led them to some awful behavior, but at some core place, I can resonate with them. They're human, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from. They're human, they're hurting in some way, they're struggling in some way, and I'm always able to find, almost always, there's some people who wouldn't let me do that, but would let me get a feel for what their experience was in life, okay? And with that, I could empathize with them. With that, I knew what questions to ask. I knew how to relate to them so that they would feel like, okay, this guy's got it. This person cares about me, and that would then help me, of course, diagnostically in terms of understanding their dynamics and what they were dealing with within themselves, within their families, within their community, okay? And then it also gave me a sense of, okay, what do they need from me in order to be able to make a change? Yeah, there are a lot of, technical interventions out there. There are, 1 million models of therapy out there, and they all have something to offer, but these are techniques. But what technique do you use? And even when you think you have a good technique, how do I do this and how do I deliver it? So that they can relate to it. And if I can get a feel for who they are, if I can walk in their shoes, okay, then I'm much more sensitive to what they need from me and how they need it from me in order for them to take it in, so that then they would actually change. Okay. I want to give you one more example about just what I talked about. I'll make it very brief. I saw a family for a workshop that I did at the University of Connecticut many years ago. Saw the family in a separate room, a husband, wife, several kids, and the guy had punched his son, his adolescent son, and had gotten really freaked out because he had done that. He had never lost his temper like that before. And he came in for counseling, and that was the family that they gave me to work with. He was adopted. And I tried to work with the family, couldn't get anything that really helped me to understand what happened, really understand it. And then I tried to get more into him and what his experience was. And what he told me was, he was adopted, that his mother had to do some stuff that was illegal in order to be able to adopt him because she didn't have a husband, she didn't have a family of her own, and she was able to somehow finagle the adoption, so she was able to raise him. And she went through all kinds of hoops in order to raise him. And this guy owed her everything. And now she was dying. Now he was her caregiver and was there all the time now, trying to take care of her. And I said to you, that must have been a real challenge for you. And I said, yeah. Then his wife and even his kids said, yeah, he's always there. And he's really nervous and he's really uptight because of that, but he won't never let us help him. Well, I knew something of that because it's hard for me to let people to help me myself, because I had to sort of raise myself because my mother worked and my father worked and I was all alone in my house. So I had that as my experience. So then I really started to get into what it was like, how sick she was, what he had to do, and so on and so on. And we got into all of that with the whole story of that. Then finally something clicked in my head, and I said, tell me again what happened with your son. He says, well, I'm in the house and family's in the house. I'm walking down the hall, and what I hear is my son arguing with my wife, and he's being crude. I mean, he's using language that, you don't use with your mother, and he's being completely disrespectful of her. And when I finally got to him, he says, I just lost it, and I punched him. And so, well, do you think, making a long story short, do you think that the way he was treating his mother, that your experience with your mother and what she did to you and what she meant to you, okay, that might not have been the switch that was then opened up so that, that overflowed into how you saw your son doing to his mother, to your wife. And boom, boy, everything connected for him. And he said, yes. And then we really got into it. End of the story, at the very end of the session, he says to me, you really helped me. This was really a help for me. And I don't know how you did it, but you knew what to ask me. You knew the support that I needed. You really understood me. And I want to thank you for it. I said, I'm really glad I was able to be there for you. Family walked out of the room. I was there with the audience, and I said to the audience, the first thing I said to the audience, my mother died 2 weeks ago, and I was the only caregiver. I knew what he was going through, and I was reliving my whole experience in order to resonate with him and what he was going through. Okay, no more stories. I promise you now. What I want to just get to in a few moments is that then when I train therapists, okay, I try to get them, first of all, to get to what I call the signature theme, which is, what's my core issue? What's the thing that I struggle with the most? Am I addicted to food, to sex? Am I depressed all the time? Do I have low self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I would spend some time with them for them to be aware of that, for them to recall incidents that fed that created that experience for them, and how they were influenced, how they were influenced by that. And I prefer to do this in a group. Why? Because then what I do is I say to the group, I want you to listen to each of you. You're each going to get a chance to talk about your own issues and your own struggles in life. But I want you, when you're listening to this person, I want you to think about your own experience, and don't go asking this person more questions. But the feedback I want you to give this person is, this is how your story affected me. So then we go one by one through the other students who are listening. And what do I hear? All the time, repeatedly, oh, I thought I was the only one. Oh, I thought I was the only one. I didn't realize. Everybody then started to open up. Yes, we're all human. Yes, we're all hurt. Yes, we're all struggling, And then what I train them to do is what I just described for myself, is that when you're sitting down with your clients, you need to open up yourself to yourself so that you can remember your own pain, your own hurt, the incidents, and try to relate to something that relates and connects with what your client is experiencing. Okay, so that when they're talking and telling you about what's going on, you have in mind and in your heart something of what you went through that resonates with that. Okay, that's what this person is talking about, describing, okay, is touching you in some way so that you could feel something of what that person is feeling. And you can do that with an individual, you can do that with a couple, you can do that with a family, so that you're in a human environment, excuse me, and you're really feeling the experience that people are having, so that then you can make a more complete diagnostic assessment of what their issues are, because I also take into consideration where they lived, how they lived, okay, not just what was happening at home and what was happening happening within themselves. You can take all of that, and then you have a sense of, okay, how do I approach them? What do I need to touch there? And how do I do it so that they can take it in and they know that this makes sense to them? And what I'm prescribing is something that they can do, and it's relevant to the thing, that the struggle, the issue that they're dealing with. And so we go through a period of time where I with students, I help them all to talk about the signature themes. And then I have them role play. They play the therapist, play family members. And when they're doing the role play, I interrupt them and say to them, what did you feel? What was it like for you when the family said this, the father said this, the mother said that, and so I get them trained to automatically just, go to their own life experience as they're listening and relating to the families that they're dealing with. Okay, and then we have them bring in videos, or I supervise them live, and so that I can help them in the work that they're doing. And I'm asking them to be fully present, to be fully accessible, so that their story touches you, whether it's an individual, a couple, a family, an extended family, whatever, so that you can feel what's happening with them, and you can relate to their whole life experience. And while we're doing this takes a couple of years to get through this work, and I continue supervising some people long after that. Okay, what I ask them to do while they're actually in training formally is to write notes after every session that they observe, whether they're presenting about themselves or somebody else is presenting. Write a note and send it to me and tell me what it was like for you. What did you experience when you saw them presenting, when you dealt with this particular family that I was supervising? so that I, with the person who's working with me, we could read this, we could understand what they're going through, and if they need us to be supportive of them, to give them some counseling, to suggest that they go into therapy themselves, whatever it is, we monitor what they're going through. Okay, and so that they get comfortable with, yeah, well, our trainers are human beings, and they've talked about themselves. They're asking us to be human beings with our clients, and to really feel and experience our clients, and to use that experience in order to relate to them, to understand them, in order to know how to intervene with them. And that can be broken down into many different steps technically. I'm trying to think of, yeah, here it is. Got a little book. The name of the book is The Person of the Therapist Training Model. Carney Kissel, who's from Israel, and I edited the book, and it breaks down what I'm talking about in very technical terms. Also, I think if you go in Facebook, I don't have the link right now. I couldn't find it, but I just had an article of mine published. It's only 8 pages. The Soul of Therapy, the Therapist's Use of Self in the Therapeutic Relationship. Okay, so that just came out, contemporary family therapy. All right, and you should be able to find it on Facebook or somewhere on the internet. There's a link to it. And if you don't have that link, you can correspond with Ackerman, and I promise you, I will find the link and I will give it to them, so that then you could contact Ackerman, and they'll give you the link to the article itself. I have it open access. I paid for it, so I could give out this article freely without any kind of inhibition. Whew. Okay, I'm really done talking. So I'd like to just sit back and open it up for any questions or that you have, or comments that you have, or arguments that you may have. I'll be glad to listen to you.
Uh, We have a question, and it says, you mentioned reliving your experience when working with the father who punched his son. How does this affect your countertransference? How are you able to separate work life from personal life and not let it carry over?
Well, I had to learn to do that when I went to Menninger's, because I was still in my early 20s and I was still so much part of my own neighborhood that when people were rude with me, that my impulse was to hit them, to get into a fight. So I had to learn to talk and to try to work things out with people, even if I had to challenge them verbally or try to work things out to resolve things. I had to learn how to talk. So that's been part of my training. Although, I still don't quite trust myself if I'm really challenged by somebody, because all these old habits, come into play. But I have much more control over myself than I used to, and I'm much better able to articulate now than I was able to in the past. So that it took a certain amount of discipline, and it takes discipline to be able to be connected with your own life experience, your own past, and to be able to connect that to the experiences of your clients and use that as something that informs you and directs you, so that you're not acting on it except on purpose, that you know what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, for what purpose you're doing it. But it does mean being connected with yourself, being open to yourself, and having the discipline and the wisdom to know, okay, I can use this part of myself to be able to relate to them this way or the other way, and to make this or that kind of intervention.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Please put them in the Q&A. Okay, here's one. I recently turned 65, and as I continue this phase of my journey, I become aware of the gaps between young and old and the extent to which these are constructions. Anyway, how do you work with the memories of younger therapists when working with older people when there is no prior experience?
I'm trying to understand the question. You're saying that they don't have any prior experience because of their youth, and how do I relate to them? Is that what it amounts to, or am I getting it wrong?
I'm not sure. So the person who had that question, please, does he have it right, or? I'll read the question again. How do you work with memories of younger therapists when working with older people when there is no prior experience? I'm assuming that that may mean that the therapist is younger, they have memories, but they don't have the same experience of older clients. And what do you do with that? That's an assumption. Because I don't know for sure.
Well, part of it is remembering, and what of your memories can relate to whether it's an older person, a younger person, or an older person. They're all human. They all have human experiences, and we're all the same when it comes to that in a broad sort of sense. Okay, so that there is an advantage to having some life experience. I remember Mnuchin saying that when I first went over there and I was still pretty young. He says, I don't know how you convey wisdom to people who are young because they haven't lived it. Well, I've lived it, and my having lived it gives me a certain advantage. At the same time, okay, there's certain things that I just don't understand. Okay, especially in today's world. I often find the very young people being rather rude. and not being respectful and expecting that, the way they think is the way everybody else should think. And so I have a problem with that. But when I'm in the role of a therapist, my job is to understand. So I don't hesitate to ask. Okay, if I don't understand, I ask. I do that with people that I'm training, and I do that with people that I'm working with, so that I come from a place of ignorance when it comes to this. So that kind of experience, whether it has to do with age or it has to do with culture, okay, I will ask so that they will teach me. And in the process of their teaching me, hopefully they will also open up and see that I can humble myself and acknowledge my ignorance and be ready to really take in what they have to say. And that should bring us a little bit closer.
Okay, thank you. Any examples of when use of self went wrong when working with a family, and any lessons learned?
I remember, I'm not going to give you examples right now because I have amnesia for that. But I still remember Jay Haley. For those of you who know him, one time he said, "I want to write a book about people's errors." So he said, "So can you tell me some of your errors so I can write it in the book?" And I said, "Yeah, so you can write it in a book that will live forever. And that's what people will remember about me. So I'm not going to give you any examples whatsoever." Okay, but yes, I have sometimes, been too involved with myself and not involved enough with them that I really didn't get them. Okay, and I was really just being stubborn with myself, and there were things about me that were blocking me from really opening myself to myself, so that I could take in what they were trying to communicate. So that what I try to do in my work is to listen, to really listen, and to listen, as Theodore Reich was said, with the third ear, but listen with all of myself. And so I want to hear it, but I want therapy to be an experience. So I want to experience the other person, and that's how I approach it. So I'm not in a hurry to fix them. I'm in a hurry to understand them, so then I know what to do when it's time for me to do it.
Okay. The next question is a request for you to say more about how you train therapists to be informed by their past experience and not center their personal experience, to use self-disclosure.
Yeah, I have trained myself to really think of myself as the wounded healer. I didn't coin that phrase, but it speaks to me. And so I think of myself as a wounded healer. And I've learned to accept the fact that I have certain hangups. And if I forget, my wife usually reminds me that I have forgotten it and reminds me what it is. But I view our own struggles with life as part of what life offers us as an opportunity and as a challenge for us to try to change. So I completely agree with Freud and with Satir and with Bowen and others who say, yes, you need to always be working on yourself and to always be confronting yourself and to always be dealing with your own issues, because in that struggle, and I treat that as this is normal, this is what it is to be a human being. In that struggle, then I'm in a better position to understand my client's struggle, whether it's an individual, a couple, or a family. Okay, and so that when they come to me, I am with them in the sense of, yeah, we're all in this thing together. So when I'm working with students, okay, I'm trying to convey to them in the way that I relate to them, that what they're dealing with is human. It's not something that that your guilt and your shame should shut you down to it. But even if you don't want to, and I do tell everybody, by the way, if there's something you don't want to talk about, don't talk it, don't say it. I don't want you to be embarrass yourself in front of other people, but I want you to be able to listen to yourself and to pay attention to yourself so that you're aware, these are my issues, and that these issues are now something that I can use in a positive way, in a constructive way, which is really the essence of the whole person of the therapist work, which is we're not just there to fix therapists so they can be better fix therapists as human beings so they can be better therapists. We're there to help therapists become aware of their own wounds, their own brokenness, their own pain, their own hurt, and to be committed to working on that. So that if you're self-aware and you're committed to working on that, and this is active in your life, okay, it takes all this self-awareness and puts it in a positive perspective, because now I'm going to use that to be able to empathize and resonate with my clients, and to know something about what they're struggling with, and to know something about what it's like for them to try to change, how hard it is, and what they need from me. So that my own hurt, pain, struggle with life becomes an ongoing instructor to me, okay, that I really relish and prize. So that the difference is I don't have no fantasy about I'm going to heal you. No, I want you to become aware of your stuff. I want you to be committed to it. And then I want you to use all of that experience of yours in order to better resonate with your clients. And this becomes rather natural to people, and they tend to accept it, and it's not a depressive kind of thing, okay? And they're able to be more at peace with themselves. And what's happened, which also changed the way I was training people. What's happened is that people have been changing in their own personal lives, so that if I can control my temper when I'm with clients, I can control my temper when I'm with other people outside. If I get discouraged by a failure of mine in my life, then if I fail with a client, if I don't do well with a client, I can live with that, okay? And I can acknowledge it, and that can open me up more to that person. Even sometimes if I lose the person, I lose them, but I can be more open to them and take more responsibility for my contribution for the mistakes that I make in the work that I'm doing. So it is a matter of accepting our life struggles as a normal part of life, and as a challenge that life offers us in order to become better people and to commit ourselves to that. And we can use that when we're trying to relate to our clients and resonate with their problems, with their struggles, and with their efforts to change.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. When you are working in therapy, and if you understand oppression as the source of the pain in the client or clients, can you share an example of your use of self in that context?
Well, when you have experiences like being told to go to the back door someplace as a kid, and not go through the front door. And when you go to a store, and then as a Puerto Rican kid, and I'm talking to the salesperson, and then some white looking distinguished person comes up and asks a question, and they drop me immediately to talk to that person and not to me. So I feel like I'm pretty insignificant. Okay. And then, fast forward going into the present, coming to Philadelphia and seeing an apartment is being is open for available for rental, and I call up and I say, "Are you available to talk now about renting the apartment?" "Sure, we are." This was in a pretty fancy building, and I said to my wife, "Hey, this guy can talk to us now. Let's go over there now." Well, we got there like 10 minutes later. "Oh, the apartment's rented." Well, you there. I can give you many more examples of that. But I learned over time, that it didn't do me any good to become angry within myself or to try to, insult the other person, just to try to get even somehow or another. I see this as, okay, this person has a bias, this person has a hang up. I'm not going to get caught up in their problem. I'm not going to get caught up in their issue. Okay, I will do what I need to do in order to take care of myself and my family, and I will do that in a constructive and positive way. But I'm not going to let this person poison me. That's what I've done in order to help myself, get through life as is in our society. If I have to defend myself, that comes too easily. I can do that easily. It's the other one that's much harder to do, but I work at that and I'm very conscious of it.
Okay, thanks. The next one is, first, thank you for your presentation. The question is relating to signature themes. Will you respond differently or similarly to different families when your signature themes are activated in working with them?
Well, with some people, it's harder for me to relate to their life experience because I haven't had it. Okay, when they've had experiences that I know from my own life experience, it's easier for me to enter into their world and enter into their life. With other people, it takes me longer, and I really have to make an effort to open myself up and to listen with all of who I am, so that I can get a sense of what it is that they have gone through, that's then influenced the way they are today, that's causing them problems. But I see that as my responsibility to be able to resonate, to be able to feel what they feel. Because what I say to people, my saying about therapy is that therapy is not a conversation, it is an experience. So it's an experience of their pain and hurt, but it also has to be an experience of change. So I have to create an experience in the room, in their home, wherever I'm seeing them, so that they actually feel what we're talking about, and it has an impact on them, so that they're not just taking home a good idea, but they have an experience in the room with me, okay, that says, this feels better, this feels more constructive, this feels more useful. So I'm trying always to work through experiences, whether it's the pain of the experience or it is the constructive part of trying to change life so that our lives are better lived than they were before we came in. Okay, but it all has to do with making that connection, a meaningful connection, so that I can walk something in their shoes, and I know something. I'm more intuitive about what they're going through, so that I have a better chance of speaking to what they need in order to make those changes, in order to make myself available to them, so that they can then go ahead and make those changes. So the working through an experience is the big challenge. With some people, it's pretty easy. I know them, I've lived there. With other people, it's much more difficult. Okay, but it's my job to be open to them, to listen to them, to feel with them, and then to be with them as they walk through the journey of trying to change.
Okay. Thanks. Do you have any thoughts about meditation and awareness of self? And then thank you so much for this great talk. Fabulous.
Okay. Meditation. Yeah, I have my own spiritual life, and meditation is part of that. I need time to be able to be quiet with myself, and to be able to think about what things are really about, and not get into the frenzy of my reactions to people, whether I'm hurt or I'm elated because something was great, but to be able to sit down and be able to be with me and with what I'm experiencing in life and what I'm hoping to change in myself and what it takes to get there, but be able to do that in a more reflective, thoughtful manner. Sometimes with and part of what I struggle with is just I have to allow people to help me, because sometimes I try to do things I can't handle all by myself, and I need support and help. And sitting down and thinking about that and thinking about my resistance to that, or why I'm afraid to let go of control of my life, can help me to then free myself to take a few little steps in order to improve my life.
Okay. We have several questions that seem to be related to when you share your experiences with clients and when you just use your experiences to inform what you're doing in therapy.
Well, I'm thinking about the impact I'm going to have with people. If with this guy, Robert, that I talked about, this couple, if I had thought to myself, oh, I'm afraid of this guy, it wouldn't have done anything to him at all, because he would not have even guessed that I was afraid of him. It would have had no impact on him at all. So sharing that experience and saying I'm afraid, okay, had a huge impact on him. When I was dealing with the other family, where the guy's mother was dying, if I had started to talk about my mother dying, I would have distracted him, because I would have distracted myself for one thing, because I know when I was talking with the audience about it, it was only 2 weeks before that she had died. I was having trouble holding back my own desire to cry, the impulse to cry. Okay, so it can be distracting to me and it can be distracting to the other person. So I'm there to be of help to them. So I have to make a decision. Am I using this to just try to resonate, to feel with the person? And if so, let me just leave it at that. And that's 90% of the time. 10% of the time, sometimes I have to share something with somebody. In fact, I had just this week, I had a physician and his wife came in, and she would not relate to him. She was really cut off from him. He was talking about all the efforts he was making to try to be a good husband. And when he did make a mistake, he apologized for it. She's bringing up things from the past and bringing them into the present. And I was trying to think, how do I tell this guy what I think she's trying to say? That you're talking about an event and what happened, and she's talking about the feelings that were hurt, and she's not over these feelings. And she's still when she says, this woman said she was afraid of him because he does have a temper, and at times he has broken some of her things when he got angry at her. Okay, and then I told him about my wife correcting me. We have a daughter, and when she was very young, and I would try to correct her, and I was too direct, too strong, and my wife would say, you're just scaring her. You're not teaching her anything with that. Okay, and the same thing has happened with students. Sometimes when I've been critical of them, and I wasn't conscious of the weight that would have, especially when they're sitting around with their colleagues, their cohort. Okay, and that I needed to be conscious of what words I used and how I approached them, and I've learned a lot. I can still be too direct and I can still be too blunt, but I really have learned a lot to be more empathic, more thoughtful, more careful about how I say things, and and at times reveal some of my own struggles, so that the man mostly the man then feels like, okay, I can talk about my failures. Women do that more, seem to do that more easily with me. Guys are a little more embarrassed, especially when they're in front of their wives, to confess their hang-ups. So that I very often with guys tell them, well, let me tell you about me, and my wife. And I tell them just enough to make the lesson heard. And that takes practice. I'm really paying attention to how they're reacting, how it's affecting them. And when it's so that I learn to instinctively know not too far, not to go too far. And when I say to people is that if you're going to share something about yourself, be sure you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you're looking for. And if you're not sure, shut up. Don't say it. Don't share it.
Okay, thank you. The next is, you mentioned a question that you ask your students to have them think deeper into self. I caught the explanation, but I missed the actual question. Would you mind just repeating the question?
Well, the question for them is, what do you believe is your biggest hangup, the thing that really most bothers you? And we all have something like that. Some of us tend to be depressed. Some of us tend to be shy. Some of us tend to be insecure. Some of us tend to be touchy and easy to get angry and impatient. Some of us have trouble relating to people. A lot of therapists I've dealt with, they can relate better to their clients than they can relate to people in their personal lives. Because with their clients, they're in charge and they're protected. In their personal lives, they're not in charge and not that protected. And if they really want to get intimate with somebody emotionally, they have to be prepared to open themselves up. So that question, so I give them some of these examples, okay? And then once they start telling me what it is, then I just probe a little bit more and I have to be like a therapist. How do I approach it? What kind of questions are a follow-up to this? And I want to read their notes after the session because there may be things that they were afraid to talk about. I want them to experience their own issues, their own struggles as something normal in life and something that's a challenge to them, but also something that's a powerful instrument for us when we're working with clients. As I've learned to do that better, I become a better therapist. I still have a ways to go.
Okay. This next is, thank you for your presentation. In social work school, I was taught about having empathy and just read a book called Against Empathy by Paul Bloom. According to my understanding, his premise is empathy is overstated and coming from a space of compassion is more effective. When you use yourself, are you coming from empathy or compassion? In your opinion, which one allows a therapist to connect more to the individuals they are working with?
The word compassion to me, as I break it down from the Latin, it means to suffer with, and that is what empathy means to me. So I don't know what the difference is. I'm sure he has a more sophisticated definition so he can really take them apart. But all I know is that I want to be able to have an experience of what they're having, of their experience. That's what I'm talking about. Whatever word you want to use, so that when they're talking about their particular struggle, pain, hurt, suffering, whatever it is, I want to get into something of mine that reminds me of that, so that I can get back in touch with that feeling and I can resonate with what they're struggling with. And the more I can resonate and feel it myself, okay, the smarter I will be about what it is that they need from me in order to be able to contend with whatever is challenging them in life.
Okay. This one is, how do you use yourself to address oppression or microaggression in therapy when white clients make racist comments or when heterosexual clients make homophobic, transphobic comments?
Well, I'm there to be a therapist. And so whatever response I give, I am trying to think of it in terms of the work that we're doing. And I try to, I try to address whatever is, quote, offensive in a way that relates to what issues they're talking about. And, you know, if I really can't deal with, you know, can't find that link, you know, I may have to say, let's not use that language so that we can then, it's distracting to me. Let's talk about this other thing in this, with this language. So I just try to have them put it on the table aside. And I don't want to get into a discussion about why about it. But if I can, okay, I will try to listen to it in terms of how can I address this in a way that fits with what we're trying to accomplish therapeutically.
Okay, and this is the final question. We're just about out of time, but can you speak about the role of the place of curiosity in therapy, especially when working across social locations?
Well, there's curiosity that is bad curiosity, and there's curiosity that is good curiosity. Bad curiosity is I'm just, you know, dying to find out, you know, how they did this and why they did this. And I know that's going to take me into places that I know people will not want to talk about, you know, like they're talking about their sex life, and I may be curious about this or that about it, but it's not really directly relevant to the objective that we have. So the good curiosity is I need to be curious about the things that relate to the issues that they bring, so that that issue that they bring, you know, and getting to the issue itself may not be immediately obvious. They may think this is A is the issue, but really B is the issue. I've got to define the issue. I have to know where I'm headed, what my objective is, okay? And everything that I do needs to fit into that box. And if it doesn't fit into that box, it's no business of mine to be asking about it.
Thank you. I think I can speak for everyone who has spent this evening with you, especially knowing that people could be many other places. There are wonderful comments and thanks for this talk. So I want to thank you on behalf of all the attendees and Ackerman for giving this important talk. It has been truly inspirational, and am very, very grateful to you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity to have this occasion. I just wish I had the people in front of me so that I could be with them and I could see them. I could see that from the chat, some of the things that they're saying. So I appreciate that too. So I'm glad to get a little bit of a feedback, because I've been in your shoes. I've been in plenty of audiences, and I like to make that connection. So spiritually, let's hope we do make the connection.
Yes, thank you. So I will give you the applause that you really deserve. Thank you.
Okay,
good night
thank
to
you.
everyone.
All right.
Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you will join us for future lectures. We have another one coming up on November 12th with Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin. So if you can, please join us. Thank you so much. Have a good night and a great weekend to everybody. Harry, I'll be in touch.
Okay, take care.
All right. Bye, everybody.